And so there will be times where you might hear messages that feel scary because they feel so very different from what you've been taught is the right way. But unfortunately, the right way is actually what's created so much pain and suffering for so many people.
Finally, get back to a life with exercise. And this is your first step. We're going to start getting you moving. I'm Lynn Lindberg, your bad couch guru. Welcome to the Couch to Active podcast, where I believe that exercise should not be dreadful, but getting off the couch is the hardest exercise we do. This is Lynn Lindberg, your bad couch guru here, and today we have a special episode. I know. At the end of the book series, I told you we were mixing it up and doing 5-minute episodes several times a week. And yes, that is still going to launch on December 15th of 2019. However, I had requests from several of you that said, I need to get Natalie Forsythe on my podcast. And thank you for that recommendation, folks. Thank you, Anne, for that recommendation specifically, because we had the most fantastic discussion about disordered eating. I know Couch to Active is all about getting off the couch and getting moving, but every single one of you keep asking me about diet and nutrition and food. And even though I know a tremendous amount and I've self-studied a tremendous amount on the topic, I am by no means an expert in it. Because the more I learn and read, the more I realize it's way more complex and nuanced than any blog post or Instagram feed could ever adequately do justice for. So today I want you to meet my new friend, Natalie Forsythe. Do follow along in the show notes today. That's couch2active.com/42. She mentions quite a few resources, and the more I learn about how serious of a discussion this is, I looked up even more resources and put those in the show notes for you. So if this show really resonates or really triggers something, head over there, Couch2Active, couchtoactive.com, the number 42. And that'll be your home plate to get you started in the right direction on this topic. It's my honor to introduce you to Natalie Forsythe. Well, Natalie, it's so great to have you here today on the Couch to Active podcast. Oh my gosh, we just had a whirlwind of perfect lives and Pinterest perfect moments that just led us here together today, didn't we?
Absolutely. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, Lynn.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Folks, as you know, I am kidding once again.
Life happens to all of us all the time.
I know. Oh my gosh, if my teenagers acted the way I did, whew, they'd be in trouble. Natalie, I met you actually through a dear friend of mine, Anne, and she reached out and said, you have got to meet Natalie. And I am so glad she made that connection. So first of all, hello, Anne. I am so glad you made this connection for us. Yes, hello. And Natalie, if you can just tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Natalie Forsythe, and I'm the founder and lead teacher of the Path to Food Freedom, which is an online educational community where we support women to embrace their personal power as they heal from binge eating, emotional eating, and yo-yo dieting. And I do this work because it is indeed my own story of having struggled with an eating disorder when I was younger, trying so hard to get help from so many different people for about half of the time that I struggled, which was 10 years in total. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people honestly didn't know what they were doing. I got a lot of contraindicated treatment from people who were supposedly trained to help me. As an expert now, I can see that contraindication. Mm-hmm. And once I finally found the behavior modification tools that helped me to transform my own relationship with food, I was like, oh, this wasn't hard at all. I mean, okay, it was a little hard, but it wasn't as complex and as I thought that it was as I was sitting in these other therapeutic environments. So it just became very clear that this was my work in the world. And so for the last 7 years, I've been running this community and helping hundreds of amazing people to find their own food freedom.
Wow, that's just fantastic. And I got to tell you, part of the reason I was so excited to have you on board is because I'm with Couch to Active. I don't touch the topic of food, except it is top on everybody's mind all the time. And part of the reason I don't touch it is because it is not my expertise. I mean, I probably know more than some nutritionists. I mean, I maybe could even go that far, but it's truly not my expertise. I was one of those kids who was like the skinny girl in high school and never tried to diet or anything. I mean, I'm like, was one of the, what do you call lucky ones? I don't know. And then when I hit my 30s, I looked back and realized I had all these body image issues in my 20s. I didn't realize. Then when I hit my 40s, I realized like, holy cow, I have to watch what I eat so much. Or, you know, and then I, you know, have tried like all the different diets out there and all the different ways and all the fads. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I am not a light of shining beacon. See, I can't even say that right when it comes to food. So that's why we have you here. And one of the things, let's back up a little and just give folks that baseline about what we mean about eating disorders or disordered eating, and just let's scope that out for folks.
Eating disorders are clearly outlined in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of mental disorders, and there's a few of them. There's anorexia, which most everybody is familiar with, bulimia, which you know, a binge eating disorder, which was only added to the DSM, I believe, in the 5th edition.
Okay.
So that's newly acknowledged. And then there's another eating disorder that's EDNOS, which is eating disorder not otherwise specified. And there's talk about adding a 5th one, which is orthorexia, which is essentially the obsession with health to the degree that it causes distress. So not being able to travel, go out with friends, do normal life things because the food isn't healthy enough. So that's in the process of being added in as an official eating disorder.
Wow.
And that's about 3% of the population that deal with the heavy restriction of anorexia, the swing between restriction and purging with bulimia, the binging as a coping mechanism with binge eating disorder. But that's actually just a relatively small portion of the population. What I think is much more important to talk about is the topic of disordered eating, which ends up affecting about 50% of the population. And so what is disordered eating? Yo-yo dieting patterns.
So I've done Whole30, keto, paleo, a little bit of Atkins, but that was still in my 20s when, you know, done it all and yo-yoed it. So I would fit in there.
Yeah.
Darn it.
Yeah.
Okay, keep going.
We could definitely talk more about the dieting thing because people think that they're dieting in order to help themselves.
Yeah.
They think that that is the thing that's going to help them to have health and to have the weight that they desire and the body that they desire. But unfortunately, it gives me goosebumps right now to even share this information with your community, because unfortunately, there's one study out of UCLA in 2007 that I think is one of the more moderate studies, actually, that is looking at, I believe it's 17 long-term studies on dieting and restricting food.
Oh, wow.
And what this study showed is that dieting, in the end, for 65% of people, leads to greater weight gain than ever lost.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's
the yo-yo, right?
And okay, keep going.
And that's the more moderate study.
Yeah.
There's other studies that show that 95% of people gain back more weight than ever lost through purposeful restrictive eating. And even more painful than that, Lynn,
Mm-hmm.
is the fact that people who end up, I believe it is Susan Barnes, but
Mm-hmm.
we might need to double check
Okay.
that one before we incorporate that one into into our recording here. That she's done a lot of research to show that actually restrictive eating ends up leading people to develop obsessive food patterns, including binge eating.
Yep.
And so dieting is actually the what leads people to develop binge eating a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's actually this pendulum swing between heavy restriction, trying to control what you're eating, and having this perfect guideline of how to do it.
Yep.
And then the moment that something stressful happens, it's too hard to use your willpower to stay in that structure.
Yep.
And because you've been in such restriction, both caloric and mental,
Yep.
what happens is that pendulum ends up swinging erratically over to the other side, over to eating in a way that feels out of control
Mm-hmm.
and makes people feel crazy.
Yeah.
And it's that out of control eating that people feel so bad about and ashamed and guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to work with me, it's rather mind-blowing to realize that actually it's the restriction that is more of the problem, and that the binging is more of the symptom.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I remember when I did the Whole30, I was proud of myself. I went really, really public with it. So when I one thing I've learned about myself that I'm not proud of, but I know I'm not alone, is when I put my ego on the line, I can be really successful because I don't want to, fail. So I was really public. I told everybody I'm doing Whole30, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of it, I told myself I'm not going to publish the results. I lost 9 pounds and my blood work was beautiful. But I was like, I'm not going to publish that until I see if this is long term. And lo and behold, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
And I gained more than that 9 back. And you know, and same thing with the keto, same thing, and
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So purposeful restrictive dieting leads to greater weight gain and further disordered eating in the vast majority of people. So we started talking about what are the characteristics of disordered eating, and we only got to number 1, which was the yo-yo dietary patterns.
Oh man.
So there's more.
Oh man. Okay. I'm literally on the couch here. So go ahead.
All right. And another characteristic of disordered eating is having a lot of rules around food and exercise. I must do this.
Yep.
I must exercise this much. I must, which plays into that pendulum swing again, because the moment you don't, then you're bad and you fall, quote unquote, off the wagon. And then you say to heck with it and end up, not moving for another 3 weeks until, it's Monday morning again and you harness that energy. Right. So all those rules end up, while people are using them to try to help themselves, to have structure, to take care of themselves, they end up backfiring because they're backed up by judgment. You're good if you do, and you're bad if you don't.
Yeah. And cortisol is one of the hormones that's part of putting fat on us. So
Absolutely.
that stress I failed is just metabolically, hormonally telling your body, okay, you failed. Great. Let's work harder to store extra calories on us.
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Another aspect of disordered eating is the having heaps of guilt and shame connected to eating patterns. So just being bogged down by guilt and shame and having a lot of self-judging thoughts around eating is a sign of disordered eating as well.
Yeah. That's something that I've really shifted recently, is that no food shame, even in the house. Cause I think, And it's interesting because now it just rolls right off my tongue. No food shame, no food shame. And I remember I was hanging out with a woman at an event that I hardly knew, and bumped into her, and she had this like big old beautiful donut in front of her. And she's like, oh, you caught me with the donut,
I'm so bad.
I know. And I was like, before I could even stop to think, I don't know her very well. I was like, nope, no food shame, no food. And she looked at me like, wow, that is not what I expected you to say. I'm like, enjoy it. Seriously. Don't feel bad about it. If you're
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I find that it is that judgment around the food that, oh, this food is bad, that
Yeah.
ends up making it so that people eat it in a way that feels really out of control. If you can drop the judgment and the shame around the food, then you can just be present with the enjoyment of that gorgeous donut.
Yep.
Let's be real, donuts are delicious. There's
Yes,
nothing.
they are. But I'm going to cut that out of the podcast. And no, I'm kidding.
No food shame, Lynn. No food shame.
Okay.
Yeah, to be able to drop the judgment and just enjoy what's in front of you allows people to not then get into the mental preoccupation around food of getting really stuck in cravings and then eating them in a way that feels like binging, which actually dovetails perfectly into the next aspect of disordered eating, which is having a huge amount of mental preoccupation on food, weight, and body.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, and that's where I can absolutely see it fitting into 50% of the population, men and women, especially women, but men too, because especially with, I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I mean, every marketing, everything we're told, I mean, it's marketing 101, make somebody feel like they're lacking or missing something. And here's the solution. So we're constantly being fed, no pun intended or pun intended, all these really bad messages that lead us to believe we're not good, we're not worthy unless we blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then people get stuck on this mental hamster wheel of food thoughts, weight thoughts, body thoughts, and that just perpetuates. And I know for sure that being able to identify those thoughts and start to shift them is a really important part of the process. A lot of my students, when they show up, I ask the question, what percentage of your mental energy do you spend focused on food and body thoughts? And, you know, for myself, when I was stuck in the throes of my eating disorder, I would have said 95%.
It's always
just think about how much mental energy that is.
It's always
you know,
there.
And my students, I would say, are saying the same thing. And it's beautiful to watch that number go from 80, 90, 120% sometimes.
Yeah, because we can multitask. Yeah.
Right. Down to being in a much more stable place where it's just about the more functional thoughts around food and body.
Dang. Does anybody ever fully, completely conquer that?
I mean, even within that question is built in the same dynamic of the all or nothing.
Yep.
You know, you either are going to perfectly conquer your eating disorder or you're going to be a failure for life. You know, it's like I can speak from my own experience where I used to really be at a legitimate 95%. And I was so obsessed all the time. And here I am a decade later where it's those thoughts pop in once in a while.
Yeah.
But I have such a different relationship with them where I'm able to just go, oh, sweetie.
Yeah.
Oh, I see that thought there. It's okay.
Yeah.
You don't need to have that thought.
Yeah.
And then I'm able with kindness and compassion to be able to redirect myself onto what I actually value and want to spend my time thinking about.
Oh my gosh. That's, you know what? That's actually really, really, really beautiful. And I just talked to James Garrett, who talks about neuroplasticity and really about reframing the brain and reframing it. And it takes time to rewire those thoughts so you can just see it and then relax into it. And it's not this cortisol raising, or at least not as bad, all consuming, weigh myself every time I go to the bathroom. And people talk about weighing themselves once a day, but I think a lot of people really weigh themselves every time they go to the bathroom sometimes, you know, like.
Oh yeah. A lot of people do. And, you know, I think an important step for a lot of people is to let go of that number as a sign of their value and worth. Yep. And for myself, I've chosen to not weigh myself for nearly a decade.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, you know, my body is pretty much the same,
Yeah.
you
It's
know?
amazing. It's amazing. S-
Absolutely.
So, so for folks who haven't really thought about this in detail, are there any stereotypes or myths about disordered eating that typically come up, or things that you wish people knew that?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think is a common stereotype is that you can tell someone has disordered eating patterns by looking at them.
Hmm.
That you can look at their
Oh,
body
oh, yes.
and be like, oh, that person's way too thin, they must be anorexic, or that person's really fat, they must binge.
Yeah.
And that's just not how it works, actually. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there are people in quote unquote normal sized bodies that have extremely disordered eating patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people in very large bodies who have balanced, healthy relationships with food. So to think that we can use someone's body as an indicator of their disordered eating patterns, I think is really a painful misconception.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I would say that's the number one for sure. And even with fitness, people tend to assume if
Uh-huh.
you look a certain way, you're healthy or not. And let me tell you, I have been, as a fitness instructor, I had a woman come in to one of my classes once. It was a New Year's Day class, and she was the
Uh,
only one who showed up, in the morning on New Year's Day. Like, you have your resolution, but you start it on the second when it comes to
yeah.
fitness. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're still, everyone's still hungover, right? Seemed like a good resolution at the time. Anyhow, she,
Yeah.
comes in ripped, deltoids, calves, quads, all that. Zero core strength. And from the skin, you could tell she was suffering from something. Like, she was just like
Mm-hmm.
not healthy, even though I think on the outside, a lot of people would assume she looks great. And it's just like Linda Bacon's book, Health at Every Size.
Health at Every Size.
Oh my gosh, that one's there's chapters in there that are so amazing. I literally
Yes.
read them out loud to my family and
Mm-hmm.
help them to realize that your BMI, body mass indicator, is one, it's a flawed measurement in the first place, and two,
Sure.
it really isn't. And I know I'm doing an aside here, but I'd love to hear your thought. It really isn't necessarily an indicator of health. We have this fat phobia society,
Yep.
and the fat in and of itself isn't the health indicator. It's so many other things that has nothing to do with health. And I'm doing a bad job of explaining that. Do you want to dial that in a little
Sure.
closer?
Yeah, the Health at Every Size movement and Dr. Linda Bacon's research is truly profound.
Yeah.
And so, for the listeners out there, if you struggle with the concept of, thin equals healthy, fat equals unhealthy, and that causes you a lot of mental distress, I really want to support you to pick up this book
Yeah,
and to read it.
absolutely.
It's also available on Audible, so listen to it if you don't want to sit there reading it.
Yeah.
And the summary of the research is that there are so many factors at play beyond the weight on the scale that indicate health.
Yes.
And that this book is chocked full of so much research that indicates that people who are in that it's really dependent upon there's genetic factors, there's a variety of things happening within our genetics, but then there's also the blah, 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 my words are getting
you're good. You're doing great.
The thing that we actually have the capacity to have an impact around with our health, and I think that this is what's most important to acknowledge, is the nourishment that we bring in through food.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we move our body. So you and I are a perfect match in supporting people into generating genuine health.
Yeah.
To think that losing weight is going to create greater health is quite the misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that especially because all this research that I cited earlier about purposeful restrictive dieting leading to greater weight gain, it's shown that yo-yoing between weight is actually much more harmful to our health indicators over the long term than just maintaining a higher weight.
Yep. Yeah.
And so focusing on getting really nutrient dense foods and moving the body consistently, that's what we actually have the capacity to have control around when it comes to our health indicators.
Yeah, it is fascinating stuff. And folks, if you've ever caught yourself saying that somebody would be healthier if they just lost weight, get the Linda Bacon. It's the easiest name in the world to remember, Bacon, right? I mean, yeah, exactly. And it's her stuff is fascinating. Or just look her up, and she's got all kinds of articles and things that'll really summarize what this is all about. And it's not the body positive, ooh, I love me no matter what, which is beautiful and valid. She's a scientist, and it's
very much.
Yeah, because she's scientist first and research first, which is amazing. Yep. Yeah.
A really easy place to start to learn a bit more about health at every size is there's actually a PDF document that if you just Google Health at Every Size Manifesto, yes. It is in the back of the Health at Every Size book. And I believe it's about 4 pages long. And it just lays out really clearly the tenets of the philosophy and of the research. And that's a great place to start.
Awesome. I'll put the link to that in the show notes for folks too. That'll be good. Folks, before they come to you, they're not in denial by the time they come to you for help. Is denial a piece of it, or is this just so in people's faces? You know, where does that fit?
Yeah, for the people that I support, I would say most people are quite aware of the harmful behaviors that they're engaging in. And sometimes they're very aware in the moment of they're doing this thing right now and they can't seem to stop. And for other folks, it is more like waking up the next day with that food hangover and being like, I can't believe I did it again. I find that very few people actually are in denial that I encounter. There is more denial that happens within the realms of deeper into eating disorders with anorexia and some real body dysmorphia. There is denial that happens there, but most of the folks that I support are very aware that they're doing it. They've tried so many different things to stop. Unfortunately, a lot of those things, like diets, perpetuate and make it worse. But one thing that I just want to acknowledge, and it connects in with the denial and the question you had around stereotypes, is that a lot of folks dealing with this kind of disordered eating are very intelligent people.
Oh, yeah.
Very smart people. And, you know, I think one of the stereotypes is that folks with this kind of patterning are a mess, that they don't have their stuff together and that they're not very high functioning. But what I find is they're super high functioning people.
You have to be able to meal plan down to the nano whatever, and you know.
Yeah. And that then the pendulum swing over to the binging and the emotional eating ends up becoming this moment of emotional release and coping that these highly functional people need in order to be able to cope with this very stressful life that we're all encountering.
I have no idea what you're talking about. My life is roses and rainbows. Come on.
Easy peasy, right, Lynn?
Exactly. Oh my gosh. So let's pretend that we've got somebody out there listening and they have a friend and they're having this epiphany of like, oh my gosh, you're right. I knew my friend wasn't. It's not right to diagnose them in the first place, but they're realizing, oh, disordered eating disorder. I think I have a friend who needs help. What advice do you have for that person wanting to help their friend?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I would bring is to just be present with them and be there, and to show up with compassion and kindness around this conversation, because if your friend is dealing with disordered eating, you can guarantee that they are already dealing with a lot of guilt and shame and judgment internally themselves. And that what helps us to melt that is the kindness and compassion. It's like what I was saying earlier about my own thought patterns that I've rewired, of being able to be like, oh, sweetie, I hear you, you know, showing up with that energy, and being willing to ask the difficult questions
Hmm.
and to show up with curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of instead of just ignoring it, because very often people will say things like, oh, I can't believe it. I like ate a whole pizza last night and I feel so terrible. Or, you know, I just can't believe that I don't have any more of the Halloween candy left. I ate all my kids' Halloween candy. Or, you know, like
Yeah.
these kinds of statements that show that that person is feeling out of control.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to just brush them aside because it's uncomfortable to address them.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to show up and instead of just saying, ha ha ha, you ate all the Halloween candy, ha ha ha, you know, which I think is a pretty normal human response,
Absolutely.
you know, that if you really are concerned and you've noticed those comments in the past, that in those moments you could show up and, you know, say, you know, I hear you and that sounds really hard. Does that feel really painful for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And see if the person then says, yeah, I like think about it all the time. It's constantly there. Or if they're like, no, I just thought it was funny, you know, and you can, which they're not going to say.
That's actually, now that you put it that way, I was like, well, no, not yeah. Okay, keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, but being willing to ask those curious questions to get them to open up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, asking like, is there anything that you've done to try to address this? And if they say diets, you could drop some of this knowledge that I've shared today, that diets actually end up leading to disordered eating.
Yep.
And that there are other ways to address it that don't perpetuate it.
Yeah, diets end up eating to disordered eating.
Yes.
and it's not just a willpower thing. It's not just a mental toughness thing. There really is some metabolic and research behind it that shows. Yeah.
There's metabolic and psychological research that shows that there is this pendulum swing between restriction and out of control eating. Mm-hmm. And people think I'm a failure, my willpower has failed. But the reality is it isn't your fault. You've been set up by this dominant diet culture to think that you're the one doing it wrong. But let's be real.
Yep.
The diet industry is, oh gosh, I think we're well over a $50 billion industry, I believe, the last time I looked at that number. There's a lot of people profiting off of you being in disordered eating patterns. And so finding other resources such as Dr. Linda Bacon, the work that I do, the intuitive eating framework that support people out of the disordered eating by learning how to break the pattern of the black and white, break the pattern of trying to control and inevitably having that pendulum swing to out of control. It's possible. We can rewire our brains. We can change our behaviors. There are these behavior modification tools that are shown through the evidence and through, the anecdotal results of the students in my community, for example, that people can completely change these patterns and change their lives so that they're able to spend all that mental energy focusing on what they're actually so hungry for.
They're actually, and spending their energy on what they're meant to do in life.
Exactly. And finding what it is that's truly fulfilling and putting their energy there. And that's what really fills me up when I get to see people do that.
I love that. And Natalie, you mentioned intuitive eating. And for folks who are new to intuitive eating, one of the misconceptions out there is intuitive eating is just eat when you're hungry, don't when you're not. And there's a whole lot more to it than that. And I don't know if you want to give a quick 411 on that. Sure.
Yeah. I am a certified intuitive eating counselor, and it is definitely one of the modalities that I teach from and has been super important in my own healing. And at a base level, hunger, satisfaction, and fullness is an important part of the intuitive eating framework. We've in diet culture spent so much energy going to these external cues to know what, how much, and when to eat, whether it's the diet plan or, the all of the different structures
Yep.
out there. Nutrition is telling us what we should and shouldn't have.
Mhm.
And so on a base level, the hunger, satisfaction, and fullness is an essential part of the intuitive eating model. And it is more complex than just that.
Mhm.
And so much of what it's really about is it's about learning how to shift away from getting all of our cues from the external, from the outside world, and learning how to get back into our own bodies, feel what we're feeling inside of ourselves,
Mhm.
and allow that to support us to make choices in how we eat.
Mhm.
Part of that is honoring our hunger and our fullness. And part of that is learning to really listen to what our deeper needs really are,
Mhm.
because very often people are going to food to meet these core needs that just can't possibly be met by the food.
Mhm.
And so it is about becoming more embodied and learning to listen. And there's so much to say about that, but
Yes.
I will leave it there for now.
No, it's great. It's great because I mean, I listen to all kinds of podcasts, and I've just heard several bodybuilding podcasts try to debunk intuitive eating as if, oh, if I just ate intuitively, I would eat 4 pizzas a night. And it's like, well, don't, it's, yeah.
That is the thing that people say all the time. Well, if I were to just eat intuitively, I would eat everything. Because one of the tenets of intuitive eating is also what we were talking about earlier of no shame around food. It's that
Yep.
food is just food,
Yep.
full permission to eat any food. And so people hear that and they're like, uh-oh, if I let myself eat the donut, then I'll never stop eating donuts.
Yep.
And it's actually quite the opposite, because the way that it works is that it's full permission with body attunement.
Yes. There you go.
The truth of the matter is no one feels good after eating a dozen donuts. No one feels good. That's just not how our bodies work.
Not unless they have a bunch of shots of tequila in them, but that doesn't last very long.
That's not quite body attunement
Yeah.
either. So it's really learning to listen to the minutia of how different foods make you feel, and then learning how to choose what to eat in order to feel the way that you want to feel.
Yeah, there we go. I love that. I'm gonna pull that out as a quote. That's beautiful. Is this really only a woman's issue?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No. And sadly and interestingly, the incidence of male eating disorder has skyrocketed in the last 10 years.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. And what the experts are believing is causing this skyrocketing is that, and it gives me goosebumps again to think about it, is that men are now encountering a similar level of judgment on their physical forms that women have been encountering for so very long. And it's precisely because of social media selfie culture.
Oh my gosh. I was afraid that's exactly what you were going to say. And that's so interesting because the social media has also helped the body positive movement. So pull all that together in the horse ring. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the reality is that, all of these tools, social media, podcasts, they're incredible because it allows us to connect with people that we would have never connected with. I mean, my community filled with all of these brilliant, lovely women who are all over the place. I would have never met if it weren't for social media.
That's how we connected.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No question. And on the flip side of that, the tool is only ever as good as the intention behind the person using it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that is really interesting to see that really women have been hit with marketing and what we should look like forever. So we've really blazed this trail of all of this. And now that men are being hit with it too, it really does demonstrate it's not just a woman's issue, how it's becoming an everybody issue. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now men are more and more concerned with their physical appearance, and that is creating disordered eating for them. And so the focus on how we look physically and needing to look a certain way in order to be socially acceptable is at the root of these disordered eating patterns for most everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think men right now, hopefully it'll improve, but I think they have a double whammy because I think culturally, from my experience, is culturally women are doing a better and better job of supporting each other with how they look, regardless.
Yep.
It's not perfect. And we're allowed to talk about it. In fact, it's almost somewhat fashionable to talk about it.
At the moment it is, isn't it?
At the moment it is, yes. But not so much for men.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, there is so much stigma around men feeling their emotions, having emotions at all, and getting help. That men are supposed to just, in this stereotypical fashion, be stoic and have it all together and not need any help, not cry, not have feelings. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I hope I hope we see that slowly change. My husband and I, we actually do a different podcast together called The Lindberghs.
Right.
And we dive deep and we talk about a lot of emotional issues with the men that we interview. And
beautiful.
It's amazing. And every single one of them who really is, I would say, brave enough to be vulnerable, also mentions how hard it is to do that as a man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. So Natalie, any other what the heck moments you've had working with folks or just messages you want to get out there?
I just really want to affirm that if you are right now experiencing these disordered eating patterns yourself, and you are stuck in these mental cycles of shame and guilt around how you eat and how you look, that it isn't your fault, that there is a way out, that it's absolutely possible to rewire your brain, to learn the compassion and kindness, and to bring in new behaviors. And it's going to be opposite and counterintuitive from everything you've learned in diet culture.
Amen.
And so there will be times where you might hear messages that feel scary because they feel so very different from what you've been taught is the right way. But unfortunately, the right way is actually what's created so much pain and suffering for so many people. And I stand as an advocate for that different way of profound healing so that we can then all show up and embrace our personal power so that we can shine brightly in this world and create whatever that contribution is that our heart and mind and soul is here to do.
Oh, that's beautiful, Natalie. Thank you so much for that. Oh, wow. Well, folks, if folks want to get a hold of you, I know you have a pretty amazing program and quite a following. Where can we send them?
Absolutely. My website is natalieforsythe.com, and it's very possible to just reach out and contact me there if you're interested in potentially pursuing one-on-one work. And I think that the best place for people to actually, if you like the way that I've been talking today with Lynn, and there have just been a lot of aha moments and a lot of like, oh yeah, that's me, then what I'd actually really support you to do is to sign up for my next free intro class, which is just the way that I share an hour of the 6 essential steps to finding food freedom in this class that's called How to Find Freedom from Out of Control Eating. And that's a great entryway point into all that I do. You'll get on my email list by signing up for that class. And you can do that by going to natalieforsythe.com/Lynn. I made a special link for your audience. So again, that's Natalie, Natalie, Forsythe, forsythe.com/LYN.
Great. And we'll have that link in the show notes too, folks. As soon as we know the episode number, they'll be able to be 2 clicks away. Not so bad.
Perfect.
2 clicks away feels impossible nowadays, but we can do it. You guys are smart, right?
You can do it. And I also just want to acknowledge that it does actually take a lot to take those 2 clicks when you're really in the throes of this struggle.
Yeah.
And so I just want to stand right now as a beacon of hope that it can be a different way.
Yeah.
You can experience a life where you're not so focused in the mental obsession all the time, and where you do have space to think about, do, and be someone different than this disordered eating pattern. And so I just support you to take those 2 clicks to do what you need to do to get the support that you need to find that freedom for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so nice to just know you're a real person. You know your stuff. I know people who worked with you and they love you. And like I said, it was some of my audience that came to me and said, you have got to interview this woman. So that's how we met. So
wonderful.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such an honor.
Absolutely, Lynn. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity to share this information with your people.
Alrighty, you heard Natalie. She has that special link for us where you can get that free training about disordered eating from Natalie, and that's at natalieforsythe.com/Lynn. And remember, I am Lynn with 1 N. Also, head over to the show notes at couchtoactive.com/42. The link to that mention and all the mentions that Natalie said, the Linda Bacon book on health at every size, helplines for folks who have eating disorders and disordered eating, anorexia, bulimia. Those resources are also listed there. And if you have been looking for a safe place to go with a real human being who truly is helping people work through these issues, do check out Natalie Forsythe. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a momentous milestone for our podcast, because we are no longer going to do full-length interviews. Instead, starting next week, we'll have a couple a week, and they'll be short 5-minute action-packed podcasts that are designed to keep you moving every day, because I know you're busy, I'm busy, and it's not that we're just busy. We have a lot going on, and we don't want to spend hours and hours every week listening to podcasts. We just need something to get us going and up and running, or walking every day in the week. So please look forward to that, the Couch to Active podcast, and it's all new music, all new format, all new style, 5-minute episodes. Alrighty, have a wonderful week all, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye now.